Welcome to Awakening the Body. Conversations around sexuality, psychedelics, trauma, shame, acceptance, and loving self-kindness. How can we bravely co-create safe enough spaces for our erotic and ecstatic selves to emerge and flourish, opening up to radical self-love for our weird, wonderful, and full beingness? I'm your host, Rachel Charlie, somatic sex educator living in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on the unceded Indigenous lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk Nation. This 9th episode is a conversation with Tyson Adams around some really deep societal wounding. We talk about porn addiction, circumcision, some of the impacts on the individual and relationally on many levels, and we touch in a little on working with entheogens and some of the learning and healing in these spaces. Tyson Adams is a trauma-informed IFS men's coach, somatic body worker, and psychedelic facilitator. After spending 20 years addicted to pornography, he outgrew it 7 years ago and has found his passion and purpose in helping other men master their life force energy. He also co-facilitates men's work leadership intensives and works with couples experiencing intimacy challenges. When he's not working, you'll catch him on a rock wall or riding a slackline in sunny San Diego. You can find Tyson Adams on Facebook and Instagram, as well as tyson@thrive.life via email. That's tyson@thrive.life, and Thrive has 2 I's in it. You can also find these in the show notes. If you are interested in financially supporting this podcast, you can find a link to buy me a coffee in the show notes. Thank you, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hey Tyson, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm just going to say this is the first podcast I've done with somebody I don't actually personally know. Yeah, so it's really new.
Well, we will know each other at the end of this.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of chats, right? And it feels good. Like, I feel like there's a lot of rich, juicy stuff to share and to talk about. Yeah. And how to start, like, you have a wide scope of experience that spans a lot of stuff that's really, I think, important work around sexuality, around ideas of addiction, around porn. And there's also the use of different kinds of substances, medicines, entheogens, psychedelics as well. And I was thinking of starting real simple and maybe like talking about what is addiction, why is it important, and why is it important to talk about it as a concept, while also like destigmatizing shame around it, like because of I believe that it's that most of us hold some of the pieces of this inside of us all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So when I think about the word addiction, what I think about is any behavior that you want to stop, but for whatever reason you can't stop, that also has a deleterious effect or impact on your life and or on the lives of others around you. So let's just kind of jump to the porn addiction. I know what that's like. I was in that bubble for 20 years. And now being 9 years free of that, I've kind of made my practice and the men that I coach made that the thing that I specialize in, because we have a really epidemic global problem with pornography, and it's getting scarier and scarier as the technology is effectively leapfrogging and virality, but also in the ways in which it loops you and keeps you and commercializes your life force. So I'll pause there because that's even a lot just to take in.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. Especially the leapfrogging and growing exponentially part is a lot. I just want to circle back to the idea of addiction. I liked what you said about it. I wanted to add a small piece about that. I don't know if it's that relevant, but when I think about addiction, I think we have a natural impulse to reach for our basic needs, right? Love, food, shelter, all those things. And I think that's what addiction is, reaching for something and not getting that, the nutrient of the thing that the human actually requires, and something else is substituted for it.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that and say, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and shelter and food is at the bottom, but people don't commit suicide because they don't have food and shelter. Look at people living on the streets. People commit suicide because they don't have connection to themselves and to others. And so when I look at addiction is a lack of connection to self and other. And the addictions that we have are a product of, as you mentioned, reaching for something that is an empty calorie. It doesn't actually fulfill one. And so that's the world we live in, and technology makes it even more scary. So connection to self, connection to others is really the foundational piece of this then. Yeah. And that's pretty devastating that so many of us struggle with this constantly. Yeah, and we come into this world, if we were to go back a few hundred years, and we come into this world living in, small groups and tribes, and everybody knew everybody's name, everybody knew what their responsibilities were, and people would wake up and there would be several people there saying, "Hey, what did you dream about last night? What was it that you want to share? Let's sit around the fire." And that's long gone. And our individualism is not actually how we are wired as we have evolved over, hundreds of thousands of years into being who we are today. So it's the social media and the things that we go to and the porn creates pseudo attachment and pseudo relationships, but they're not real unless we use it as a tool to connect. And therefore then have real relationships. I've met many of my closest friends through the internet, but that's the way that I use the tool. Most people are not using it in that particular way. They perceive that they have all these friends, but really they're unbelievably depressed and lonely inside.
So I've heard you talking quite a bit about porn, and I've thought a lot about this too in my work. And I think one of the things that I knew, but constantly shocks me, is there's such a lack of, in a lot of our cultures, understanding of how to be in a body, what to do with our energy, how to regulate ourselves, and then at a pretty young age, changeable for some people, our introduction to how to work with the erotic energy in us, which we have from conception, right? It's a pretty, I remember my journey as a kid, it's a pretty hard thing to deal with. There's this big feeling inside of me. What do I do? I feel like, am I going to die? What am I going to do with this? It's not going away, right? And then there's porn from a really young age. And that's a solution to quieten this down so that you don't get into trouble. You can kind of do the things you need to do, go to school or whatever. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yes. Coming of age in our society, where my mind goes with that is, every time I have a connection call with a man, I ask him a very simple question. And I say, "Hey, when you were coming of age from boyhood into manhood, did you have any elder guidance as you made that transition?" And 99% of the men say no. And so just as you mentioned, you have all this erotic energy. What do I do with it? Oh my gosh. No elder guidance, no transmutation practices, no martial arts, no moving of the energy through the system, not understanding how to work with erotic energy to put that into focus, drive, and flow or creative projects. And now we're just flooded with all of these emotions. And then, of course, there's this porn thing, right? And we find it, and it's just a dopamine, just boom, just a highway for, oh, if I get on this will take me to the right spot.
Yeah.
And yet we go there and we fulfill that, and we fulfill it. And it's like the lottery machine. Like for a moment, we're like, oh my gosh, but we never quite get there. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so the reason why I share that is just to understand that way of being. Actually, let me back up and say the nature of these porn companies know that, right? And when you're on social media and you're flipping through Instagram, they're feeding you an ad. And so if something's free, then you are the product. No different than porn, right? You're flipping through Pornhub, they're feeding you ads. The more that they can keep you there, commercializing your life force, the more money that they make. And so they don't care about your age or your goals or your dreams or your marital status or your religion or even your what is ethical or not ethical. They're seeing you only as a means to an end, which is profit. And so as I kind of tether that back to your original question, which is these corporations which have corrupted morality and lots of trauma at the top of who build these things, understand and have capitalized on the fact that we didn't have elder guidance as we became moving into adulthood, or let's just say even puberty. We'll just start there. Yeah. And then we also have to consider the fact that for thousands of years, masturbation was sinful, meaning from a religious perspective, if you did that thing or you had, relationships outside of your marriage, or if you masturbated, you were actually told that you were going to go to hell. And so it's kind of this conundrum where the porn has kind of popped the top off of that. Don't you take away my porn after thousands of years of people telling you you're going to hell. And then the weaponization of this technology to keep us hooked and to monetize our bodies and our souls effectively.
And it's even before coming of age. Like I remember I was first exposed to porn, I think I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So this is pretty young conditioning and sexualization.
Yeah.
And what that all makes me think of is, aside from the bigger question that we're going to talk about, is there something else? Is, what would education and ritual around our erotic energy, around stages of life, how much we need that to protect ourselves, to be embodied, to really be in this incredible life in these bodies. The joy that's possible, the love and connection that actually is always right in front of us. With so many billion people in the world, how can it not be always in front of us? And what can we do to change that?
Yeah, so two questions for me, from me to you. First off, what was that like at 8 years old for you without editing it? Like, what was that experience like when you were young, if you're open to sharing it? And then how would you set up that sex positive initiatory process for children? Because you and I are having the conversation, and I have my ideas. I'm curious what your ideas are.
I do remember that experience. I had actually forgotten about it until this conversation. I remembered but this was in school. We'd moved to a different town, and there was this little boy that was kind of my friend, and he really liked me, and apparently he had a crush on me, and I didn't know what that meant. And then his friends showed me pictures of people, I don't know, they looked really serious in the picture. They were naked. The nakedness didn't scare me. And I also saw a lot of porn after that, inside homes. And I was kind of scared and disgusted, and it looked really serious.
Yeah.
And that's my memory of porn. It looked serious. Like if people were laughing and looking like they were playing a game, I might have gotten into it, but I had this real distrust of serious adults that didn't have fun. And
Gotcha.
and I thought it was really gross. Like even putting tongues in mouth at that age, like I knew was a thing. I'd seen it. I experimented with some friends. It was kind of like almost as bad as putting slugs in people's mouths, which we tried as well.
Yeah.
It was really gross. It was just like, why would I want to do that? And like a penis in a vagina, yuck, don't put that in, like yuck.
Yeah.
But this little boy and his friends thought it was really cool to be showing me that, and somehow it was going to bring my friendship with him closer and make it more real.
And these boys were probably the same age as you, I would assume?
Yeah, exactly the same age. Yeah.
So then what you're speaking to here is that non-consensual revealing of pornography has been happening since magazines. And now it's even more viral because you have Snapchat and dick pics and all that stuff where you can send it and then it just goes away. And so kids are getting bombarded with these images. It's happening so quick, so fast. And man, so where do you think we should go? Like going back to my second question, what does a sex positive initiatory process look like for boys and girls as they're coming of age? What can we do? Like, what does that look like?
I can imagine a lot of ways that it would look like. I wouldn't know how to implement stuff like that in our culture because of the kinds of ongoing unconsensual acts between people of more power than others around sexuality.
Yeah.
And I'm also not a parent, so I would be speaking, but I think the most important thing is bringing in age-appropriate sex education from a really early age that kind of talks about this thing that exists in a way that the people learning it can process it and understand in their bodies. I had very big feelings of erotic energy as a little kid that I remember really clearly. And it was hard to know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Right? Except somehow they had to be really private or somehow something was wrong with me. But it was really my life force energy just wanting to move through my body powerfully. Big.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think we grew up in a sort of time where it was the birds and the bees talk, where you sat your child down and you had this talk. I didn't get that talk. I actually had my mom, she caught me masturbating to pornography when I was in high school, and my dad tried to have the talk with me after I'd been caught. And I was like, I get it, Dad. A little too late. I'm obviously not going to do that out in the open anymore. I'm sorry. And it was obviously embarrassing, right? But I really agree with you. I think the ongoing conversation from the time that they're young is critical so that it's not this thing that builds so much energy where they've already have all these questions, where it's a very casual kind of hit or miss thing, but it's not this thing that we as parents or society force our child prematurely to learn about, but that when it starts to emerge and arrive, that there's a place where it can land where they're not going to be in trouble, they're not going to be punished, like that there's going to be that they're going to be met with curiosity, and that they also can be informed of this thing that's out there that isn't good for them. And that they understand that if somebody shows that to them or does certain things to them that are non-consensual, that they know what to do in those moments, to be able to say, no, I don't want to see this. This is not okay. Or whatever it is that you established with that relationship with you and your child. So, and then browser blockers. I mean, for people that are of age or above, no, but for young ones, why not just prevent at best we can, because this stuff is infiltrating all the time. It's getting smarter and smarter. And and just keeping them off of social media as soon as, as long as you can, despite the fact that it's happening so quickly. But man, oh man, we're in a very, just a weird time to be alive, for sure. So.
Yeah. So this is really important foundational stuff for who we are as humans, this kind of sexual education, knowing, understanding the body, feeling safe. And like, I'm kind of a bit of a dreamer. Like, I imagine a world where we can feel safe about our genitals. We can feel our genitals. It doesn't matter what shape they take, where we can touch ourselves, where kids can explore their bodies and it's not fetishized or sexualized. And it's a normal, welcome expression. We are so not even close to that.
I know. Great example of that is one of my friends has a little girl. When she was about maybe 3, she came up to me with a vibrating toothbrush and she had it, and I said, "Oh, is that your toothbrush?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, does that feel good?" She's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's a toothbrush." And she just was like, "Oh," and then just started brushing her teeth again and walked away. And I thought about that and I was like, wow, you handled that well. You could have absolutely done that in a way that made her feel that I was saying that that's not okay, or that I shamed her, or what have you. So it's just about those micro experiences and being aware of, because how many mothers, slap their child's hand away when they're doing the diapers or whatever, right? Where little kids are reaching down and it's like, hey, we're going to explore our bodies, and it's important not to, not to hurt or harm our child just because they're doing something that could get messy,
Yeah.
So.
And it's kind of like this, as adults, it's our job to heal this so that we can just slowly bring in something different through generations. But also I'm looking at the directions we're going into, and so I'm going to ask a question that's a little so just thinking about porn in general, I'm going to just say this out loud because of the prevalence of this as well. So what's wrong with porn? It's people consensually having sex. It's good educationally, and some of it is, and some of it's diverse. So why is this, I'm not enjoying asking this. Why is it problematic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there was a study done in 2015 that showed that 85% or 87%, I can't remember what it was, percent of the porn that were the top 20 or 25 videos of that year contained some form of violence, sexism, and or gender-ism, in the sense of the male was receiving the orgasms and the women were receiving a very small amount of those orgasms. And so what's important to understand is beyond what the industry is doing to us, we are eroticizing things that create a nervous system of violence and sexism and genderism and all of these different things that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
And then we're wondering why we feel dysregulated, and we don't connect the dot to the fact that we are literally bringing in the energetics of those individuals on the other side of the screen that are coming through the technology and into our own bodies. And that is something that I learned on psychedelics, doing mushrooms and then watching pornography and starting to see, oh my gosh, we're not just watching porn, we're eroticizing the energetics of whoever it is we're watching, and whatever their journey and story was, we're now bringing that into ourself. And as I got in touch with that, I realized, oh my God, I'd been doing that for decades. And then I went on a pretty major journey to move all that trauma and all that violence out of my own system, which was quite a laborious process, but unbelievably therapeutic and necessary. And I'm so grateful, but it's, there's a lot there, a lot of energy.
Yeah. Yeah. When you spoke about that and the nervous system dysregulation, brought me back to one of the biggest kind of surprises for me in working with sexuality is the discovery that probably shouldn't have been surprising, that of, nervous system regulation, feeling safe, pleasure, slowness, gentleness is not something that a lot of people seem to have come across. Breathing, connecting the breath with the pelvic floor, connecting with the genitals without moving, slowness, and also listening to the genitals, not using them to get somewhere, to get something.
Yeah.
So it's like we're using, and the body rebels, our genitals rebel against this.
Yeah.
They speak loudly.
Mm-hmm. So I'll share a brief story around that particular topic, which was, I can't recall when this was or what I was on some sort of a psychedelic, and I was doing some, sexual alchemy practices, but I kind of came to this conclusion that I had never actually apologized to my penis for treating it as an object and for using it as a means to feel better. Whenever I was sad or sick or bored or angry or anything I didn't want to feel or lonely, that's where I would go. Mm. And in that experience of that light kind of flipping on, whoa, you have not actually related to this as your own body. Yeah. I then just was well, you can just say you're sorry then. And I was really taken back by what was constellating in my own psyche and soul. And then finally I was well, yeah, just do it. And so I just put my hands, around my genitals and just said, I'm so sorry. And I remember doing that and then just breaking into just grief and just tears and just weeping and moving through the energetics of just not realizing how much I had hurt and harmed myself, even as a young one, masturbating to the point where I would bleed even sometimes because I needed my orgasm to feel better. And understanding how I hadn't respected my own body, because number one, it wasn't respected at birth with circumcision, but two, my body was also not respected just because nobody taught me how to respect it, and therefore I didn't know my own limits, and so I didn't even know to use lubrication, and so I was hurting myself. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting aspect to this that's shown up that I think is important is that apology to my own body helped me to be able to finally hold the capacity to apologize to other humans that I had hurt or harmed as well. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, and in that process, then I could be able to understand the impact of my behavior on the opposite sex, especially women that got caught in my porn storm where I was using them to feel better as well. And then to be able to apologize, not as a place of absolving my guilt, but saying, hey, are you open to receiving an apology? Yes, I am. Hey, I want to say that I was out of integrity with these behaviors, and I'm curious to know how that impacted you. And then to be able to hear what they have to share, and then to be able to really sit with that. And so part of what I've learned in this process is that our capacity to apologize to our own bodies for the ways in which we've used it is in direct proportion to our capacity to sit with our uncomfortability of being accountable for the ways that we've also treated the outside world in the same way that we treated ourselves.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oof. So you've already brought so many deep things in. And before I even name them, which you've already done, like circumcision, like porn, like the impacts that it has on relationships. What I'm curious, like when you went through this process of being able to be open to hear what the other people you'd been with in these places felt like what did you learn about? What did you learn about when they spoke?
I learned that the way that I perceive my behavior and the way that they perceive my behavior wasn't as bad as what I was laying in on myself about. They actually saw me through a light that I didn't even see. So that was really healing. And it helped, at least from what they shared, several of them, it helped them heal some of the wounding that had happened in other relationships with men that they didn't ever receive any accountability. And so by owning that, we end up helping ourselves to heal, and we end up helping them to heal in ways that they needed to hear that from the masculine and from men. So it just makes the world a better place when we can really do that. And yeah, I would say that's the main point there. So
yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah. You have you are about to release a 6-week course around this stuff, or a 6-module course.
6 modules, 90 days.
Yep. 90 days. Cool. Sorry about that. And I wrote down the names of the different modules. Semen retention, outgrowing porn, sex transmutation, mindful masturbation, sexual reflexology, and becoming multi-orgasmic. That's a pretty big arc there. Pretty awesome. Yeah. I'm curious about the semen retention part. And you've put that first, right? So how is that supportive?
Yeah. So I've named this program Retain Your Life Force because I feel like that really speaks to the semen retention space, especially. But first we have to define semen retention before we go into why. So most people think semen retention and they think, oh, I can never ejaculate again, or what am I just like not supposed to? And that's not at all the case. When I say semen retention, all I mean is elongating the space between when a man chooses to ejaculate. And then in addition to that, doing it with more mindfulness. So instead of being reactive with it, doing it with that other module, mindful masturbation, which is instead of using masturbation to feel better, I'm going to use masturbation to better feel.
Yes, very good.
That's the jump, right?
Yes.
And then the practicality of semen retention for men, if you're out there, this is usually what I start with. When a man comes to me and he's watching porn, I say, hey, let me ask you, are you aware or have you connected the dots yet that masturbating creates that lethargy that you feel when you're done, where you can't get shit done? And they're like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. And there's science to this, because in our seminal fluid and in our prostatic fluid and in our semen, there are proteins, there are amino acids, there are minerals, vitamins, and there's glucose, sugar. And when that's going out faster than our body can reproduce it, then it pulls on the hypothalamus in the brain and our entire endocrine system. And that entire system, the hypothalamus, it's like the remote controller of our life. And so what does it actually regulate? Well, it's mood, it's sleep, it's hunger, it's thirst, it's body temperature, it's a whole host of other things, including the production of our testosterone and a number of other things. So if we are doing this too quickly and it's going out, and now we don't have that energy, or now we don't have our seminal fluid, our body's working on overdrive to reproduce it. So then it pulls on that system. So now we're out of whack. Now we're destabilized. And then what do we do when we're destabilized? Well, then we reach for all the other shit we know we shouldn't. We reach for the Adderall, we reach for the caffeine, we reach for the sugar, the Netflix, and so on and so forth, the drama, whatever. And so it's a revolving door. It's like if you're looking at pornography and masturbation as a revolving door, if you're trying to go to the 100th floor and you walk in towards your goals and dreams, but then you masturbate, it just kicks you right back out that door and into the rain naked. and you've not accomplished or done anything, and now you don't have the life force and your nervous system's dysregulated for you to even do the goals and dreams and the important things that you have set out for your life. So I see this as essential if you're out there and you have brain fog, you have fatigue, if you have big goals and dreams. This is the most important thing to master if you want to attract a partner, to make love, have more love, to become a high performance human that wants to make change in the world, to be purposeful. Semen retention is critical. Yeah.
Thank you. I've noticed a few things around semen retention over the course of my life. And there's two main things. One is like a real fear around, well, if I don't come, I'll have pain somewhere in my body.
Yep.
Right? There's that one. So not really any education or knowledge of how to move that energy. So fear around that keeps the cycle going. And the other thing that often comes with that is a sense of entitlement to coming, to ejaculating.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, it's this pretty destructive mix in terms of relational capacity and clearly to the actual person in terms of the price it's paying on their life as well, in terms of energy.
Absolutely. So I'll say two things to that. You and I are both body workers. I work with a massage gun a lot. And one of the most important practices for men doing semen retention is actually massaging the whole pelvic floor. So inside of the legs, all down through beneath the testicles, all the way through the anus and up into the tailbone. And then over the top, kind of where the lines are in a man, over the top to his kidneys, because the energy actually flows up the ducts and up into the kidneys, because the kidneys are where our pee gets filtered. And so if that energy needs to go somewhere, it needs to go up into the kidneys. And so that's a really important part of semen retention that most men are not attuned to. And so then they do get the pain. But as soon as they open up those energetic channels and learn how to do the microcosmic orbit and squeeze the perineum and draw the energy up the spine and back down the front channel or whatever that they choose to do, once they learn those practices, then they can put that raw sexual energy into good use, into focus, drive, and flow, which is the sex transmutation piece of the Retain Your Life Force, which is, okay, now we've done semen retention, but we got to move the energy. We can draw that energy up the front channel, the back, the left, the right, the center column. We can draw it to different organs. And there's also science to it, because when we draw that energy up, the brain actually changes. We actually can access gamma and other brainwave states that allow for us to have more creativity and to be more connected. So there's some science to it that's finally coming out. I've been running some experiments with neurofeedback to be able to show men the importance of treating your body as a bioelectric, entity, or not treating it, but relating to it as bioelectricity, and learning how to move energy so that you can, put that energy to good use.
I also sometimes think of using that energy and directing it to places of the body that might be numb in a person, to bring more energy there, and also places that are injured or sick, to bring the energy there to support like possibilities of healing and awareness and sensation there as well.
Have you done that? Has there been a time when you've used it yourself to move through something?
Myself. I'm not thinking of, wow. I've used it with other people a lot and suggested it and brought it in. It's a really important part of my practice. Myself, I'll often run it through my body to check what's going on. I do that. I'll see where it's not going, where it wants to go. I did have an issue for about 5 years where the energy would run down the left side of my leg like nervous energy, and it felt like nerve pain, and I wondered what that was. But that was because of a autoimmune disorder I have on my vulva, and the way that the skin was laid out. And once I realized what that was, I could work with the skin and change it. And once I opened that up, that stopped happening. So it's kind of the opposite way around, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I run it through my body and check.
Okay.
Yeah, stuff.
I love that. I mean, everybody's nervous system's wired differently, and everybody can put their raw sexual energy into different use. I remember this one time I was doing a liver gallbladder flush. And so you have to drink the olive oil and lay on your side. And I remember sitting there, squeezing the perineum, drawing it into my liver. And all of a sudden I could feel the stones going pop, pop, and like going from the liver into the gallbladder. And I was like, oh my God. And that was like a game changer for me. I was like, wow, it works, you know? Yeah, it's just such a powerful energy. The first time I unlocked it, I was on a 10-gram mushroom journey. And, you know, the chakras, red all the way to purple, and then white's outside of that. I was basically over the course of 30 minutes just working one chakra at a time and seeing that fractalized colors as I was mapping my own chakra system. And I was like, oh, that's what the hell they're talking about. And I didn't know it until I got it. And then I saw it in the third eye.
Oh, now I can answer your question properly, what I do with my sexual energy. So in psychedelic space, it just fills me up. I become a creature, I become my divine self. I'm full of light. This is when it's going really well. And everything feels like I am fully in the moment, and everything feels like 1,000 orgasms. And it's just moving. And then I'll see visions around that, like I'll become a creature of light. But I feel my body more and more and more in that space. I'm always in the body and this divine creature full of bliss and light. And I just keep trying to bring that more and more into my daily life. So that's what I do with it. It's really, the most profound way for me to be present in the world. Right? It's like a really special place for me, that space. Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, that's my answer.
You had asked me 2 questions and I answered one, and then I don't remember the second one. Do you remember the second one? Or should we just move on?
Maybe it was about sex addiction, but we can just move on. Was it that, or was it something else? No,
it wasn't sex addiction, but it's all good. We can keep flowing.
Yeah. Maybe we could flow into like that's a lot already. Like this is profound stuff that affects most of us on some level, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
And the thing I love about this work and the impacts it's had on my life as well is with some change, things open up so profoundly. And what would the world look like if we grew up like this? Like, this is the question. I get so excited thinking about that. It's like, how would we do relationships differently? How would we love? What would we be doing with our lives? How would it look? How would it feel different to not be in such a materialist, capitalist space and be in a space of love? And this is not just Rachel Rainbow Bunny talking. It's not like this is actually highly practical and enhancing our connection with the more than human and everything around us, with love and respect for difference. And by difference, I mean the difference between me and the planet itself, right? Like living with respect and love and gratitude on this planet in these lives.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that in order to embrace that idea, we have to become multi-orgasmic.
Yes.
And understanding that the path of liberation is through being able to feel the entirety of the world's energy moving through us, including the most atrocious grief, but also the most highest highs. And the more capable you are to feel the lows, the higher you can go at the highs. And somehow, some way, you end up landing in the middle, and you get to a place where you're not just living in a flatline culture where most of us are just in a patho-adolescent kind of stuckness where we're trapped. We have to be outside of ultimately those commercializations, those ways in which we've been effectively, treated as a means to an end. And I do believe that starts with us. And I also do believe that starts with stop circumcising the boys. That's a really critical one, because
that's a really critical.
It's like, I know we're kind of going back to a more serious topic, but it is one that's important because you and I have had a lot of dialogue around this, and I think it'd be worth opening it for a moment, if that's cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think for me, so I teach a simple map, although challenging for most men. It was challenging when it came through for me in a 10-gram mushroom journey. I've done a lot of 10-gram mushroom journeys now that I think about it. But when you do that amount, lots of transpersonal collective trauma can be processed through an individual's nervous system and soul. And in this particular experience, what was revealed to me is that the way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world. But there's another component to that, which is the way that an infant's penis was treated before he had any agency coming into the world has an impact on the way that he treats it today. And the way that he treats it today is how he treats the world. So I share that because I was born at 7:37. I was circumcised at midnight. My mom heard me screaming in the other room. I was brought into my mom's arms again. But I'm pre-verbal, I'm pre-egoic. I'm just an open vessel. And so my take on this is that's the original mother wound. I come from my mother. I immediately come to this world. I have pain. I would only assume that I could only relate that pain to mom. And so the point is if we want to bridge that gap of having a more peaceful, more loving world, I do believe that we need to take a hard stance to the stopping of boys having their penises mutilated. And that's, I'm choosing to use that word purposely because I don't believe that we can consent to that. And if people do want to do that when they get to be an adult, then allow them to do so. But the actual surgery itself, if you're an adult, when you go in, it's considered a cosmetic surgery. It's not considered a necessity, regardless of what culture and doctors have told us. So that's really something I feel very, very opinionated about because I've moved through so much grief in order to arrive at the work really starts with how we treat our own bodies. And that's the world we live in. When we treat this with care and love, then we treat others with care and love, and then the world reflects that back to us, and then we live in care and love all the time.
Yeah. It is another really deep topic. Thank you for speaking to it. Other things about circumcision, I'm going to start from a different tack here. I think I was 42 before it was the first time I ever came in contact with an uncircumcised penis. In Australia, I think it was way more prevalent than I'm living in Canada. And that person was amazing, realized and taught me about it, said, oh, you've never, okay, let me show you. Right. And having said that, the impacts of circumcision on sexuality. So once again, I'm bringing it back to relationships and how it actually changes things significantly.
How so? What's been your experience with that?
Oh, my experience with it. Okay, so if I am fluid bonded with somebody with a penis, if they have been circumcised, I notice a huge difference. Gosh, this is getting really intimate. Okay, I can do this. First of all, it's a difference in my lubrication not disappearing, which is actually a really big deal for me.
Yeah.
So it's a difference in comfort. It's a difference. It just feels different. It feels somehow. I'm trying to remember it. There's this kind of ease having that in the body when the foreskin is still there.
Yeah.
And it is designed that way, actually.
Yeah.
So it's actually more comfort. It's quite drying without it for me. And it hurts me. And there's also less sensitivity. It can hurt me, right? I'm pretty I'll talk about stuff, right? But in the past, when I wasn't good at talking about stuff, it did hurt me more because I thought that was normal.
Wow. Yeah, they have, I don't remember where I heard this, but men that are circumcised have less sensitivity there. And so then they also jackhammer more when they're having sex.
Yeah.
And that is also a part of the problem because you've cut off the most sensitive part of the man's body. So he's not receiving the same level of pleasure. There's a guy in my men's group who's in the process of kind of restretching his foreskin in order to have that come back. I'm super curious about it, and I'm sure I'll go down that path at some point too. But also just what an interesting phenomena that actually is. It takes about a year of doing these stretches in order for the man to have it long enough where it actually hangs like it is uncircumcised. So it's what a wild journey, right? Yeah,
it sounds like a beautiful process. I've read a lot about it because I've always been curious about it. But it's also the kinds of sensations, if you're going to have sexuality that's fluid bonded, penis in vagina, it's the kinds of sensations that the vagina is open to work better with that covering and the kind of those sensations rather than the kind of the ridge around the glands can be quite abrasive. And the jackhammering kind of thing, it also brings me back to that concept of slow, nervous system regulated. And variety, great, different styles, different ways of being, great, but it's that capacity for that. I think I think I wouldn't know a lot of stuff without psychedelics. That's another thing to bring in. I wouldn't understand multi-orgasmic. I wouldn't understand, I call them orgasmic states where there's no beginning and no end.
Yeah.
I wouldn't actually know what that was. And I think sometimes when I talk about this stuff, I might not be talking really about sex. Maybe I'm talking about practice for death by being fully alive right now.
Yeah.
So people get confused when I talk about this, when I am in these spaces. I've found safe spaces to be like this in community. But wow, it's been a long journey. And to then be able to have that practice, without psychedelics, I would not know really very much about my body or my full capacity.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I don't think that psychedelics are a requirement for becoming multi-orgasmic because obviously there are people that are quite multi-orgasmic without it. But the nature of your capacity to move energy through the body, psychedelics open up subtle body awareness that I just couldn't have even imagined if somebody would have told me about it or showed it to me. There's a felt sense of the experiential sense of it that opens up a whole other dimension of consciousness. And I will say this though, I remember recently I wrote a post, which is something of the effect of your level of spiritual development is in direct proportion to your capacity to be a sexually embodied human, something like that. I don't think that was the exact term, but that was the essence of it. And what I mean by that is that spirituality for thousands of years was like the sign of the cross and praying to an external God. Spirituality today is taking a mushroom journey and going internal and meeting the God within. And when we can meet all of our parts in that, energy moving through the system and the colors and all of the brightness and the shakes and the screams and feeling like a wild animal, you're like, oh, there I am. And what I can say about all that is just to say that just because we have reached a state of consciousness in terms of a psychedelic state or even an orgasmic state, doesn't mean that we increase our levels of spiritual development. We still have to take that sort of moment of that moment of that state of consciousness, and we have to bring it into this 3D world, and then we actually have to build ourselves and like grow some corn. You know what I mean by that? Yeah. Meaning a lot of people just go for the kicks and giggles and they think that they're now spiritually enlightened, or they think that because they've had that state of consciousness, they think that now they're, fully embodied, but they come back and they can't even clean their dishes or pay their bills or things like that. Right. So it's important to understand that when you access those, that we still have to do the hard work in order to grow our spiritual essence and our spiritual development. So hopefully that was clear.
That's really clear. Yeah. One thing I think about that, and I might just be being Rachel Rainbow Bunny, but that capacity that I feel in those places, and it's very hard to hold and to continue to be in that state for long periods of times. I'm curious about whether this is actually something we can be in as a state of being and do the dishes and live our lives. And if like this capacity of feeling everything, feeling like everything channeled through you, all the suffering, all of the things is actually what we are. Like we are vessels for this feeling of everything. And it's just we've come to a state where we're so shut down and so sick that we've lost the ability to be in this state.
I would say that that's where we likely came from, in a village life without technology, living together in close proximity. Surely that was the essence of that way of being, where a great example is I live in San Diego, and the Kumeyaay, which were the natives that lived here, they didn't have a different word for land and body. It was the same word.
Because it's the same thing. Oh my God.
Yeah. So then when colonizers came and said, hey, can we buy your land? They're like, what are you talking about? We're not for sale. Right? Meaning your money is no good here. So what did colonizers do? They took, right? So what you're speaking to is the natural state that they were operating from, in that awareness that we are in. It is us, and it is all one. And yet we lived in a way where we were operating from duality, and duality is what allows for us to make math and send rockets to space and build technologies and sail around the world and things. But we've taken it so far that we're so disconnected from what you just described, which is that non-dual space that we can touch in psychedelic states for moments, but it's hard to land that ship and live from that place. But I think if we can stay in flow, and then we notice when we fall out of flow, that's better than not being in flow and where we just touch flow once in a while. You know what I mean by that? So, yeah.
I'm thinking of just a couple more questions.
Sure.
And if there's something else you want to speak to, that's really cool as well. I wanted to ask you about DMT and mirror work.
Yeah.
So before we get on this, for listeners, like DMT, NN-DMT, we're not talking about 5-MeO-DMT. We're talking about a substance, a molecule that's in so many plants and things around the world. It's kind of everywhere. So using that,
Yeah. So the very first time I used it, I was out in Joshua Tree with my men's group, and we had decided to do a mushroom journey that day. And then we were coming down at the end of the evening, and I had this idea to smoke DMT and then look in the mirror. And when the idea came through, I shared it with my friend, and I kind of had a mini meltdown. I started yelling and screaming and jumping, and I was terrified and I was excited, and I was everything in between, because I was like, oh my gosh, can I see my shadow? Can I see anything that I can't see about myself? Like, what is it that I can, get in touch with that is invisible to my senses here in this 3D world? So my friends agreed to take me out into the desert. So after dinner, we took a big full mirror out into the desert, because my friend had one in his bus. And we went out there, and I had a lamp. And
Oops.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Great.
Okay. So we had a lantern, and my friend had a bong, and I sat down and took my shirt off, and it was really windy. It was crazy windy. And I was like, all right, guys, you're going to hold this. There's 5 guys holding the space. And they're like, yeah, you're crazy, Tyson, but go for it. So I said a little prayer, and then I hit the bong, and then I just held my breath and opened my eyes. And I was maybe about 1.5 feet from the mirror. And as I looked in the mirror, I was just looking, and it was like this: man, woman, child, brown, black, yellow, white, every color of the rainbow, basically. And I was seeing myself in all of the expressions of the divine, effectively. And after that happened, I heard all of these songs and mantras and jungle sounds and all kinds of things spiraling out of my ears in every direction at rapid speeds. And then as all of the faces and the songs fractaled and left, then when I was looking, it was like looking into an Alex Gray painting. So it's sacred geometry, fractalized light. And when I looked at my body, my whole body, including my chest, everything was just sacred geometry and beauty. It was just pure light. And then I looked at each of my friends, and they were not in physical form anymore. They were in what I perceived to be soul form. I was seeing kind of through the veil. And then as I looked at all the bushes and the cactus, I was seeing it as fractalized light, and it was all just glowing as if there was just all one color. The whole universe was just white light. And in that experience, and then looking at myself, I just burst into tears, and I heard this little voice that said, "This is what you do, bring people back here." And I was like, okay. And then I come out of it, and I'm laughing and crying and screaming and happy. And I'm like, oh my God, guys, you got to do this. You got to try it. Come on, come on. And only a couple of my other friends were like, courageous enough to do it. But that was the beginning of my journey. And I will say that in reflection, the mushrooms that I had eaten before had certainly had an impact on some of what I saw.
Yeah.
But that took me into a wild journey of now hundreds of journeys and leading countless people and couples and seeing all kinds of, interesting things, leading that for people. Lots of trauma release, lots of laughter, lots of fear, lots of all kinds of things, many, many different expressions. Everybody's experience is different. But I love it. It's super unique, and you can cut through, especially depression. I remember working with a suicidal guy, and just in a matter of one journey, it was gone, and it was just evaporated out of his system, and it was just no longer present, and his life is flourishing. So it kind of just depends upon the individual. And and it's kind of it's a little bit of a rush, but at the same time, now when I go out in the world, so let me just say this is the main takeaway, right? This is the main takeaway. The main takeaway is when I came out of that experience and then I went back into the 3D world, when I looked at people, I didn't see them as white or black or fat or thin or, or blue eye or green eye. Like I just was able to extend that and stay in that space of just seeing human beings for who they are at that soul level. And all of that programming of gender and race and color and socioeconomic background, like all of that evaporated. And it was pretty present for me for at least a month that I could just really stay in that. And it just felt amazing. I was like, oh my God, this is a superpower to be able to look out at the world and not label it every time I go out.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So that's the story.
Wow. That's really beautiful. I have tried doing mirror work with DMT and I take enough that would send me to those places.
Yeah.
I might keep working with it. I see myself as more than I see myself, and I look more like it's very revealing of the way I see my face. I generally don't enjoy looking at my face, and I enjoy it less with the DMT. There I see colors. I see colors around my hair. I see shapes. I see entities holding the mirror for me. But I see my face really starkly. And that's happened every single time. But maybe if I keep working on it, I don't know.
Well,
could be
what
just
I'll
me.
say is, well, first question, are you doing it in the light or are you doing it in the dark?
The times I've done it, it's been in light. So
Okay.
maybe I was going to try the dark next time.
Try the dark and try with a headlamp on so that it's dark in the room and you're just connecting with your face with the lamp about that far away, and just see the difference if the light versus the dark changes anything for you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I trust that psychedelics reveal to us what we need and what we, so it's also like when we have an expectation of what it's going to reveal, or we're trying to go for something, then we don't get it. And like, I've never been able to repeat that first journey, and I've gone back so many times. I end up getting new information, later on. So
I've worked with it a couple of times a long time ago, and it didn't really feel like something useful for me, so I didn't do it. In preparation for today's podcast, earlier today I did it, and I thought, I'm getting this again. Okay, maybe I'll try it like you suggested in the dark, because I was just like, I want to try this again. Like Tyson loves this. Like, let me check it out again. Like, give it some more chances.
When you do it, are you doing any sort of breath work before, or are you just kind of just getting regulated and then just kind of hitting it?
It depends.
Okay.
Sometimes
do you use a vape, or are you using like a vape pen with it, or is it?
I use a wire mesh.
A wire mesh? Okay.
Yeah.
So then what I would just say is get your body really, really oxygenated. So do a ton of like breath work so that your body can hold it. And then when you take it, swallow it. So as you hold it, and you know how you can push the lower dantian out and push it into the pelvic floor, and you can swallow oxygen, and then just hold it as long as you can and just see if that changes or shifts anything for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do have a huge lung capacity. It's unusual. I was a musician and a wind player, so I can hold it for a really long time, and I can get a huge amount, and the wire mesh ensures it. Like, the wire mesh is one of the strongest ways that you can take it.
Yeah.
And it was a lot. And I'm like, okay, that was a lot. It's hard to keep my eyes open, but here we are. Here we are again. That's my face. Yes, I see the aging. I see the things I don't like about my face. So that was my experience, right? And that is what it is.
Well, then maybe what it is just an invitation for deeper self-love and moving out of the ways in which, because that's just to kind of segue, but also to kind of include the DMT mirror work. I do a lot of masturbation mirror work. A lot of my pleasure practice is right in front of the mirror. And why do I do that? Well, number one, because all of my self-critical parts are online. So you're doing deep shadow work when you do that. But I found that over the course of 3 years of celibacy, showing up to that once a month, I found that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm deepening. I'm getting more and more loving, more and more kind. I'm loving my body more and more through this process of showing up. And all of those self-critical views and lenses started to fade away. And I started to just be more and more kind to myself.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I agree. I think I started doing a practice of masturbation with mirrors in my late 20s. So it's a really long time ago. And I did it to be kind to myself, to learn about my body. And for some reason, that is, I'm really happy to see my body as a part, and my face as a part of my body. Yeah. And I'm really happy to see myself in that. Like, it was always really like, oh, I feel like magnificent. So there's just different things that we all have. Like, so just the face is like a little more challenging for me.
I get it.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks. That was a question I wanted to ask you. So we've covered a lot of things, a lot of really deep stuff. We've come to something a little, well, it's still deep, but a little more filled with joy. Yeah. Is there anything before we end and before I ask how people can get in contact with you, do you have any last words?
Sexual alchemy and the left-hand path of combining psychedelics and sexuality for growth and human development and spiritual development is not for everyone. And if you are out there listening, or you're on the edge of your seat, or you're in a position of going, oh my gosh, this is a real fucking conversation. I wish more of these real conversations were happening in the world. Then that may be a sign that you're ready to take a step, whether you're a man or a woman. And so obviously you can reach out to us. And the most important thing is to go about it with what I call village idiot curiosity. Meaning you just walk into a village and you're like, what's going on here? What's happening, right? You enter some new place in the world and you're just curious. We have created so many, this is how my body works. This is not how it works. This is how I get into pleasure. This is not how I get in. I need psychological power play in order to get aroused, or I need this toy. If you can let it all fucking go and dissolve all of the things that have worked, or you should or shouldn't do it this way or whatever, and just start over as if you don't even know what your body is, and you just are touching it for the very first time of your life. That's the trailhead. That's beginner's mindset. That's the infinite game. That's where you're going to find whatever it is you're looking for.
And that sounds like play. That sounds like fun.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can people contact you? I'm going to put like this all in the show notes as well, so it's really easy for people to find. But
yeah. So my website's still in progress. It's going to be done soon. So I'll give you that later. But Tyson Adams on Instagram, and same thing on Facebook. And you can email me at tyson@thrive.life. And thrive is spelled with 2 I's. So THRIIVE.life. And reach out. And if you're a woman out there and you're dating somebody who maybe has a porn addiction, reach out as well. Because it's not your fault that he's doing that. It started when he was 12 or 13, and it's not about you, most likely. So if you need some support, you can also reach out to me as well. I'm happy to have conversations with anyone around these topics. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for doing this work and diving so deeply into these really important things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on and this conversation. I've really enjoyed this. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Yeah. Tyson wanted to add a really important note around the topic of circumcision. That is, if you're a parent and you circumcised your child, to not beat yourself up about that. This is a practice that is at least 1,000 years old and deeply embedded in many of our cultures. Thank you so much for listening to episode 9 with Tyson Adams, with your host, Rachel Charlie. And you can find my services for individuals and online at my website in the show notes. And if you want to support this podcast, you can click on Buy Me a Coffee. That link is also in the show notes. Thank you so much.